This morning's meeting, we're next for the left after Corbyn and Grenfell. Our speaker is Charlie Kimber, the editor of Socialist Worker. Charlie will speak for approximately 35 minutes, and then we're going to open up for questions, debate, and discussion. We will be operating a speaker slip system this morning, which means that you'll see people with the team t-shirts walking up and down with slips of paper. If you'd like to speak, really encourage people to take a slip, write down your question or a general thing about what you'd like to speak on, and then that means that we get a very balanced discussion and we get plenty of questions and so on. And really encourage people, especially if it's your first Marxism, to, more than welcome to get involved in the discussion and debate. After we've had the discussion and debate, Charlie will then summarise the discussion for about 10 minutes. So without further ado.
Well, thanks, Emma, and thanks to everyone who's come here today. A particular welcome to a number of comrades and friends who I see here who are members of the Labour Party. You're very welcome to be in this meeting, and I hope you'll contribute to the discussion. This meeting is really a continuation of the one I did yesterday. It would have been much easier if I'd simply spoken for an hour and a half. But some people thought that was a bad idea, but, there we are. If you weren't in the meeting yesterday, I have to summarise in a few sentences. The election result was clearly a massive boost for the left everywhere, a shattering blow to the Tories, a demonstration that Britain was moving to the left, a refutation of the idea that Britain was a right-wing country, a class revolt after years of austerity, racism and assaults on public services, and give us a massive opportunity to push back against the Tories, against everything they stand for, to push for another general election and to get Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street. And that's a project that unites all of us, I would have thought, in this room. And we have to think about how we can take things forward, because the political turmoil that we have seen in so many other parts of the world has now come to Britain. Following on the Brexit vote, and the general election, Jana Ganesh, who is the Financial Times' star columnist, close friend of George Osborne, wrote this on the morning after the election. Britain, the stablest of democracies, has become the Western world's box of surprises. And that's a proud thing to be said, we're now the Western world's box of surprises, according to the Financial Times. Let me just say something briefly on Brexit. It's a controversial question and would probably still divide people in this room. In the Socialist Workers' Party, we, for a leave vote on a left-wing basis, because we saw the European Union as the imposer of austerity across the continent, seen most clearly in the financial waterboarding of Greece, and that its fortress euro policies had condemned thousands of people to the mass grave of the Mediterranean as they were seeking to come here as refugees. We further said that the leave vote would cause a crisis for the Tories, could see an early general election that would offer the possibility of Jeremy Corbyn coming to office. Now, I can stand here and say, I think we were right about some of that, but that's the most important thing I want to say. The most important thing I want to say is that however you voted on the 23rd of June 2016, those of us who are anti-racists, those of us who are against austerity, those of us who supported Corbyn, have to unite and to leave behind the divisions of the past and fight together in a united way to ensure that we push back against the Tories and racism and austerity. It's very, very important that we do that, because what we've seen at the general election is a really substantial proportion of the population have given the rulers, the media barons, the political experts and so on a firm kick up the arse. We have to think how we're going to keep kicking afterwards around that. Jeremy Corbyn didn't create the mood that burst onto the scene on the 8th of June, but he certainly helped in focusing it and played an extremely important role in so doing. The right wing haven't gone away. I noticed that The odious Donald Trump has just given an interview in Hamburg in which he's repeated that he's going to come to Britain at some point. There's been, because he wasn't in the Queen's speech as a notification of a visit, there was a widespread belief that he wasn't going to come to Britain anymore. He has said he is going to come to Britain. It's not clear when, but one of the things we have to be sure of is that we are going to get the biggest possible street protest, walkouts, action in colleges, schools and universities to make sure that we show our greatest revulsion against the misogynist, racist carrier of austerity that Donald Trump is, and we should all be on the streets making sure that it is even bigger than the great demonstrations when George Bush came to Britain during the Iraq War. That's a big thing to do. And our allies in Stand Up to Trump, the People's Assembly, the Stop the War Coalition, MEND, Muslim Engagement and Development, many other Muslim organisations will need to unite in order to make sure that that's happened. And we certainly need to make sure that there is one coalition against Trump, not two, and no divisions between us around it. The big thing coming out of the election is that there's now a sense that the left can win, and that socialist ideas are part of the mainstream debate in British society. This is very, very important for us. And that would have made an interesting and important meeting, but actually the Grenfell fire has changed things in an even more profound way. First of all, I have no doubt that if the general election had been held after the Grenfell fire, Jeremy Corbyn would now be in 10 Downing Street, because it has revealed so clearly the incompetence of the Tories at a local and national level. But it's much more than that. Grenfell has crystallised and revealed in the most brutal fashion everything that's wrong with Britain today. The effects of austerity and cutbacks and the abandonment of regulation produced the death trap that was Grenfell Tower. You realise that, that thing that we're very familiar with, the refurbishment of Grenfell, was done at the cheapest possible rate, involved 60 different contractors and subcontractors, and at every stage, the choices made were not about what is best for the people who live here, what's the safest option, what's the one that would give people a better life. It was done what's the cheapest and how can we make more profit out of it. And that's why the cladding was done in a way where, to save a few £1,000s, people's lives were put at risk. We'll use a cheaper one, we'll use the cheaper option, and then we'll try the cheaper one again and again. The alienation of the people in power from ordinary people is why the continual warnings from the tenants themselves, who said, there is going to be an appalling fire here and then perhaps you'll listen to us, all of it was ignored, because nobody listens to ordinary working class people in those sorts of situations. Boris Johnson, the man who closed 10 fire stations in London, got rid of 522 firefighters' jobs, and a BBC Newsnight investigation last night had firefighters talking about how a lack of equipment, a lack of proper radios, and a low water temperature had hampered greatly their attempts to save people's lives. Gavin Barwell, the man who was kicked out of Croydon at the general election but is now Theresa May's chief of staff, was the man who ignored the lessons of the fire in Southwark, which had shown many of the problems which later were to be evidenced in Grenfell. Do you know that children of the poorest people in Britain, even before Grenfell, were 38 times more likely to die in a fire than the children of the richest? Because people live in substandard accommodation, overcrowded accommodation, where there isn't money spent on safety, and those are the stark facts of class inequality which run through every aspect of British society, and which Grenfell has shown. Grenfell is also about racism. People died there because they were poor, or because they were poor and they were Arabs and blacks, or a combination of the two of them. And that racism is continuing. I noticed that yesterday the Tories graciously said that anyone who was an undocumented migrant who came forward would be granted a 1-year amnesty if they wanted to give evidence about Grenfell. 1 bloody year amnesty. So if you know that your brother or your cousin or your mum or your dad or your kids died in it or might have something to say about it, and you're an undocumented migrant, you have an appalling choice. Do you come forward and tell people that they might be one of those incinerated bodies on the top floors of Grenfell, or that you have evidence about it? And if you do so, you might graciously be given 1 year before you get sent back, but you will be deported at the end of it. That's the racism that runs through it, and will mean we will never actually know how many people died in Grenfell, I regret to say. It's an appalling thing to say. We will never actually know with precision how many people died. We will never know the full story of Grenfell because of the racism of the British state and the racism of the Tories in particular. And Diane Abbott, who was so appallingly treated during the election campaign, was entirely correct to say that there must be a total amnesty for all of those involved in Grenfell, all of their families and all who have evidence about it. John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, got a lot of stick for saying that the victims of Grenfell were murdered by political decisions. John McDonnell was exactly and completely correct in what he said. Frederick Engels, this is an event called Marxism, isn't it? Frederick Engels, the great collaborator of Karl Marx, wrote a book, he wrote it in 1844, it was published in 1845, called The Condition of the Working Class in England. That's before they wrote together the Communist Manifesto. Engels wrote this, he was writing about industrial Manchester, he was talking about how the appalling conditions and disease and so on that impacted on the lives of ordinary people. And he wrote this: when society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet a too early and an unnatural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by the sword or bullet, when it knows that these thousands of victims must perish and yet permits these conditions to remain, its deed is murder, just as surely as the deed of a single individual. And Engels was right, and MacDonald is right, and there is blood on the hands of the Tories at every level. Grenfell has engendered a subversive and entirely correct sense that what we face is just more than a set of disconnected horrors. It's a system that inevitably produces extraordinary wealth for some people and hardship for most. Grenfell would have been a huge event in any case. It's become a wholly central event because of the fact of the people who lived there and the residents immediately around them, who decided that instead of accepting what is told by the people at the top, that they must be dignified and shut up and simply accept what's thrown at them, that they would protest, demonstrate, fight, and so on. You'll have seen that Sir Martin Moore-Bick, the High Court judge, specialist in shipping and maritime law, who's been put in charge of the inquiry, was given a very hard time last night, 2 nights ago, by the residents of Grenfell because of his complete incomprehension of the lives of those people. So when he said to them, "Is it okay if I just put this all on ice for 4 weeks?" people quite rightly said to him, "No, we want the bloody thing to start now. You can't just put it on ice for 4 weeks, and we want someone in charge of it who is going to look at every aspect of it, not just the immediacy, but all of the political questions that are raised by it. You cannot allow this inquiry to be closed down into what is expedient for the powers that be." There were 2 great demonstrations almost immediately after the fire, one through Kensington and Chelsea itself, one simultaneously through central London. And they struck some fear into members of the ruling class, which you could tell through the media. Nick Robinson retweeted a Socialist Worker tweet about the demonstration and said, "It seems the demonstrators are coming to our gates now," because it was coming to the BBC. Which he didn't say with any great relish, I have to say, which Nick Tory Robinson should indeed be worried about. John Sweeney, who was actually with one of the demonstrations, said this: "Politics has left Parliament and gone onto the streets." Parliament has left Parliament indeed and gone onto the streets. And I think this is a much bigger mood that we're seeing. The significance of the big People's Assembly demonstration recently was, of course, the deep anger about Grenfell and about austerity and cuts and so on, but it was combined with a growing hope the left can win, you know. We can get it over the other side. And our argument is that the powerful surge around Corbyn must go much further even than it is at the moment. People sometimes say we need to see the Glastonbury feeling come into every aspect of politics. Maybe. I prefer to talk about the Gateshead feeling, the 10,000 people that were there at Corbyn's rally in Gateshead. One of a series of tremendous mobilisations that were held across the country of thousands of working class people coming together, many of them young people, but older people as well, concerned, yes, about the immediacies of life and about the National Health Service and about housing and about the cuts and education funding and all of those, but also wanting to see a different way forward. Corbyn's great success was to say to people, it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't have to be like this, where everything is ruled by the market and the dictates of profit. And now we have to see about whether this feeling, whether it goes into greater struggles in order to wipe out May's government, or whether it is directed principally simply towards winning the next set of elections, whether that be a local elections in 2018 or a general election whenever it may come. And my worry is that moments like this don't come very often. We have to seize them, and we have to make sure it sees more struggle at every level of society. The Tories are in trouble, but we won't get rid of them just by watching and waiting. It's easy to luxuriate in their problems. It's enjoyable. It's correct. It's a good thing to do. But it's not enough, because you see, at some point, the Tory backbenchers and the men in grey suits and the cabinet will decide to send May back to the wheat field. You know, that it's she's played her useful role, and now we will get rid of you, thank you very much, because you're useless. The Tories are much more ruthless than the Labour Party are. You failed. Now you're going to be blamed for it. You know, there's a series of memoirs that's already started coming out. Linton Crosby, I thought it was a really bad idea to have an election. I was never in favour of having an election. Not me, no. I was simply running the campaign. I was never in favour of it. And I didn't like the campaign either. Just because I was in charge of it, don't think that I liked it. It was a very bad idea. And I was very disappointed in May, even though I was telling you she was the greatest thing ever. And we'll get more of this, I guarantee. I mean, they're already pretty well, all of them. Philip Hammond, the Chancellor, has also said, I didn't like the campaign at all. And more and more of this, it's great to see. At some point they will get rid of it, but that won't necessarily mean the end of the Tory regime, will it? You know, they have this deal now with the DUP, a disgusting, rotten deal with bigots, homophobes, people against women's rights. They are going to try and stay there for as long as possible, because they know, they look at the opinion polls now, Labour's far, far ahead of the Tories, far, far ahead, 7 points, 8 points ahead, depending which one you look at. So they're going to try and hang on. We have to find a way to drive them out. We have to find a way to drive them out. And that must mean more mobilisations in the streets and the workplaces. I mean, it will mean stuff in Parliament as well, and that's important. But the key question is what happens in the streets and the workplaces. So the People's Assembly, for example, has called a demonstration in Manchester on the 1st of October, the first day of the Tory party conference. Now, I think everyone has to work really hard to make sure that's a demonstration of hundreds of thousands of people, if at all possible. Hundreds of thousands of people, if at all possible. The trade union leaders, every trade unionist needs to tell their trade union leader, get as much transport and money to get people to Manchester on the 1st of October. But actually, the key role, really, is Jeremy Corbyn. If today Jeremy Corbyn said, I want everybody to go to Manchester on the 1st of October, the prospect that John McDonnell raised earlier of getting 1 million people on the streets against the Tories could actually be possible. There's a big responsibility on Jeremy Corbyn. I know, traditionally Labour leaders don't do things which might conflict with what the trade union leaders want them to do. Well, he has to say, I'm not really interested in what the trade union leaders say around this question. Everybody needs to get to Manchester. And if that were to happen, it would transform the possibility of what that demonstration. But whether he does or whether he doesn't, it will be a huge demonstration. We need to fight very hard to make sure it happens. And the streets can't be the only place. There's a huge feeling about the public sector pay cap. You know, year after year after year, public sector workers have faced a pay freeze or a 1% pay curb. Depending how you look on it, depending which sector it is 7 years or 8 years of people having their wages held back. Some people, that means a 14% pay cut in real terms. That's massive. That's massive. The only place that is comparable to that is the social disaster of Greece in terms of wages. That's the only similar example you can find in the European countries. And therefore, that feeling that we're going to smash the pay cap has to be directed into the workplace. And again, Jeremy Corbyn is absolutely critical, because we've been having this argument for a very long time inside the trade unions, but it's a different argument now because of the election. It's possible to say to people, we're going to fight over pay, and we're going to push the trade union leaders to fight, and Jeremy Corbyn would be with us. Look at the support for the idea of Corbyn in the country. And if Corbyn again were to do rallies around it and to do six rallies, say, up and down the country of public sector workers, saying to them, I want to see a massive fight over public sector pay, it would be transformative. It would be transformative around it. And I think everyone needs to push the trade union leaders to stop the policy of telling us why we can't fight and start organising the resistance that we need. And of course it will also mean taking up at local and national level all those fights around the National Health Service and education. There's a very revealing survey, isn't there, that came out just after the election, which showed that 750,000 people had changed the way they voted because of the education funding question. 750,000 people. Think how much work you have to do to get 750,000 people. No. It was that question, not just the question, the fact that there was resistance about it. That parents and teachers held meetings, they had demonstrations, they agitated around this question. We need to keep pushing around this question. I'm sure the Tories will retreat to some extent on it, by the way, because it's so difficult. Even the Tories are up in arms about it. But we need to find a way to push them back completely around it. And that means more demonstrations, more meetings, and if possible, strikes over this question as well. We need to push that everything that seemed impossible for the 8th of June is possible after the 8th of June because of the political transformation that it's revealed in British society. And that's especially so about the councils, you know. I know this is a difficult issue to raise with lots of people in the Labour Party leadership, and they've largely run away from it. But the fact remains that local government, the crisis is not going to go away. It's going to get even deeper. The chair of the Local Government Association made a speech last week in which they said that even if we stopped all maintenance, didn't do anything on parks anymore, closed children's centres, closed all the bus routes that we don't have statutory responsibility for, stopped doing anything on the roads, even if we closed all of that and got rid of all of those services, we would still nationally be in deficit by £6 billion by 2020. I mean, that's just the elimination of local government, except for a very few statutory services. And the question that every Labour councillor has to ask herself or himself is whether they are now, in this new environment, going to say, we're not going to do it anymore. We can't do it anymore. And I'm not saying it's simply a matter of declarations. It's a matter of working alongside trade unions and the Labour Party nationally and communities in which people live and say that we are going to stand against the cuts because simply enough is enough and we can't do it anymore. And were they to do that, they would get massive support. I'm convinced about it. And you see, it comes up in a very concrete way. It comes up in a very concrete way. You know, at the moment, 150,000, 200,000 people are gathering in Durham, partly to listen to Jeremy Corbyn because of the Miners' Gala. It's a very, very important working class event. It's taking place in Durham, though. One of the delegations on it will be the Durham teaching assistants. And they have been fighting for a very, very long time against wage cuts imposed by Durham Council, led by the Labour Party. And the new deal they've been offered still means that more than 1 in 5 of them will have their pay cut, and the ones who don't have their pay cut have to work more hours. Now, it's a simple question. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of low-paid working-class women who are having their pay cut, or are you on the side of the council? I'm sure that, if he weren't the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn would every time be on the side of the teaching assistants, and I'm sure that every Labour Party member in this room is on the side of the teaching assistants. Our argument is we need everybody at every level of the Labour Party to support the teaching assistants. That surely must be what, for the many, not the few, means in this context, and therefore we have to get entirely behind those people. I think there's a chance we can get action over the pay cap. Don't guarantee it, but I was very much lifted by the attitude of the Fire Brigades Union earlier this week. They were offered 2%. It's bloody awful. I mean, they were offered 2%, but that's more than, some people would have said, that's more than the pay cap. That's pretty good. We've achieved something here. Actually, Matt Rapp was much better than that. He said it's a wholly inadequate deal. It's still less than the rate of inflation. It's still a pay cut. We're going to fight against that. And I think that's a good thing, and it means there is a possibility of broader action around it, and other trade unions have to have the same attitude towards it. And if that happens, because there is a possibility of a wider struggle around it, we can really harm the Tories over this sort of questions. We'll also need a struggle against the Labour right. The same people who are pushing through the cuts and austerity at a local level and defend austerity at a national level are the same people who are after Jeremy Corbyn inside the Labour Party. And therefore there's the possibility of a really profound unity, whether you're in the Labour Party or not. We're against what the Labour right is seeking to do in getting rid of Jeremy Corbyn and of continuing the austerity policies at a local level. And we need to unite and to fight around those sorts of questions. And another central question that is around anti-racism as well. We've very much in the SWP stressed how the questions of racism frame the wider issues in British society. And I think we've been right about that. Questions of migration, questions of who's to blame for the NHS crisis. Is it because of a lack of funding, due to privatisation, due to closures, or is it because of health tourism and so on? It's been extremely important to take on all those questions. I was very proud when Stand Up to Racism disrupted, let's use a nice word, disrupted UKIP's press launch at the beginning of the general election campaign. It was a very important thing to do, and it meant that they were broken from the start of their campaign. And we must continue to build a big anti-racist movement in Britain, because if you were a Tory, don't think about it too long, if you were a Tory and were thinking, how are we going to recover, there's absolutely no doubt you would look at the social attitudes survey and would you see that on many, many issues you're losing over privatisation, over benefits, over redistribution of wealth, over higher taxation for the rich. These are popular ideas now, and they're the ideas that Corbyn put forward at the general election. The ones that the Tory ideas are still ahead on are migration and terrorism/security. In other words, most people still want there to be big attacks upon rights of migrants to come to Britain, and they also are unperturbed, apparently, about locking people up without trial if there's any danger of terrorism in Britain. So if you were brutally calculating, as the Tories are, you would say the issues we're going to work around are racism and giving more powers to the cops. And therefore we need a big anti-racist movement, which will also be a movement against Islamophobia. When you see the appalling acid attacks that have taken place in a number of parts of East London, you realise that the words of the politicians and the words of the newspaper editors are not just disgusting words, they're words that produce horrific effects on the streets and in Britain more generally. And every person who is the victim of an acid attack or who is the victim of a racist murder, the immediate perpetrators, of course, have a responsibility, but the perpetrators are also in the newspaper offices and in 10 Downing Street as well. And we need a massive anti-racist movement to take on Islamophobia, to fight for the rights of migrants, to fight for the rights of EU nationals, and to push back against the growth of the far right. There's a reason why the far right is not as big in Britain as in other parts of Europe. It's because people organised in the Anti-Nazi League and Stand Up in the Unite Against Fascism and a number of other anti-fascist organisations. If it had not been for that, the far right would be much bigger in Britain. And those are the sorts of political choices that are in front of us. And we need a much bigger Stand Up to Racism. The conference it's going to hold in London on the 21st of October is extremely important, and we have to push back against the far right and against racism more generally. We also have to start thinking about a Jeremy Corbyn government. It can't come soon enough. It can't come soon enough that we get rid of the Tories. It won't be easy. As I say, they'll try and hang on, but we can hope that there will be another general election in the months or years immediately ahead, and that Corbyn will be in Downing Street. We have to start thinking about that. It will be because he broke from what Tariq Ali called the extreme centre. Not because he bent towards it, but he broke from the extreme centre. And that victory would be a huge boost to the whole of the left, and it would be giving confidence to everyone to fight at every level. And that would be one of the most significant things about it, actually, that every workplace, people will go in with a massive smile on their face and think we can stick it back at the other side now, in a way which has felt impossible for a long time. But there won't be everyone who's feeling like that. And as we saw in the parliamentary vote last week, wasn't it? There's a big section of the Labour Party that still have it in for Corbyn. Chuka Umunna and so on, leading the people into the lobbies over the question of the single market. And they will seek more concessions from a Corbyn government. They will say, that might have been in the manifesto, but it's much too early to start talking about renationalisation. It's much too early to start talking about higher taxation on the rich. And we need our counter-pressure against those sorts of people. Because the trouble is, Jeremy Corbyn has already made concessions to the right. You know, it would be much better to go into the election in truth and say, there's £200 billion here. It's not a magic money tree. It's called the Trident nuclear missile system. And to say, we're going to get rid of those nuclear weapons. Instead, there was a concession to the right wing and to some of the trade union leaders, the leaders of the GMB and Unite and so on, who wrongly argue we have to keep an appalling mechanism of death going in order to provide jobs for people. Of course we need jobs for people, but £200 billion could supply those jobs 20 or 40 or 100 or 1,000 times over, as well as getting rid. If Jeremy Corbyn is in Downing Street, we know what will happen. We know what will happen. There will be immense fury from the ruling class and from the financiers as well. So the bond market, the bonds is how they borrow money. A government borrows money. Every government borrows money. They issue bonds. People buy them. The price at which they buy them is what shapes interest rates in society. So the price of bonds will fall, which means the interest rate rises, and there will then be an attempt to say the governor of the Bank of England, who is entirely independent, will say we have to jack up interest rates in Britain. In order to keep the investment flowing, in order to get people to buy the bonds. If that happens, mortgages will go up 2%, 3%, 4% higher than they are at the moment. Living standards generally will suffer because prices will rise. Now, there's a simple question here. I don't know how many, perhaps 1 million people who have mortgages at the moment, very low rates, mortgaged up to the tips of their ears, will suddenly find that the mortgage rate is going up, and they will be going under. There will be mass repossessions if the interest rate goes up in that way. Now, if you can't control the Bank of England and interest rates, you can't control anything, to be honest, inside the economy. And therefore, the Bank of England has to be taken back, and the right to set interest rates has to be taken back. Indeed, you need to go further than that. You would actually need to begin to say the banks have to be controlled by everybody, democratically, not by a few financiers. And a Labour government is going to face opposition from the media, and it will suffer the same sort of experience, if we're not careful, as that of Syriza in Greece and of Hollande in France. January 2015, Greece was the hope of Europe. People had voted against austerity. It was a fantastic moment, genuinely a huge breakthrough. Then there was 6 months of negotiation with the European Union, wholly unaccountable, not interested in democracy, at the end of which they came forward with an appalling cuts plan. And the people of Greece and the great Ochi referendum, voted no. Huge, great achievement, vote no, within a week. Within a week, because they hadn't, in their own terms, got an alternative. The Syriza government did a deal with the European Union and the International Monetary Fund and the local rich and the local bankers and the international bankers, which implemented a worse austerity program than that of their conservative forebears. That's the truth. It's a tragedy. I don't think it's because Alexis Tsipras was a weak individual. I'm sure he has individual problems, but that's not the major reason. The major reason is because within their system, they will put immense pressure on any left-wing government that's elected, and unless that government says, we're rejecting to you, and we look not to the power of Parliament, but to the streets and the workplaces and the mobilisation of ordinary people, and we're going to take over the banks, and we're going to take over the companies that refuse to invest, and so on. Unless that is done, they will crush you or they will force you into compromises. And it's the same thing as we saw in France with François Hollande. François Hollande was not always the shrunken, appalling figure that he is now, amidst the wreckage of the French Socialist Party. He was elected amongst rejoicing in 2012, having declared himself to be the enemy of finance, and that he was going to rule in a way that had broken from everything that the Tories before him had stood for. The reality is, after a very, very brief period of reforms and higher taxation on the rich, Hollande was broken by the bond markets, by the resistance of the investors, and by the power of the unaccountable media and the unaccountable bosses. And that led to the disillusion amongst the working class and a further opportunity for the fascists of the Front National to grow. Now, I don't say these things because I want you to think, don't get too excited about Jeremy Corbyn. It'll all end in horrible tears, you know. It'll all be terrible and the fascists will grow. That's all you'll get. Don't get your hopes up. That's not my point at all. My point is to say it will be massively welcome if Jeremy Corbyn is elected. But if you think just getting a majority in the House of Commons is going to end the struggle, it will be the beginning of a much bigger, higher-placed struggle. And the only way you can push back against that sort of power is to use all the strength of the working class, all the strength of the working class, based upon the streets and the workplaces and its own democratic self-organisation, going beyond what is legitimate in parliamentary terms. If the Trade Union Act hasn't gone by the time Corbyn has been, I know he said he will get rid of it, but I want more than the Trade Union Act. I want all the anti-trade union laws to go. I want all of them to be removed, and workers are going to have to learn that if necessary they must defy and ignore the trade union laws if they have to fight in these sorts of situations. If Donald Trump comes here, I want resistance at every level. It'd be great if people have meetings in workplaces. It'd be good if they have meetings in colleges and universities. But actually, if Donald Trump comes here, I think it would be great if people could walk out of work for 15 minutes, or walk out of university, or walk out of college for 15 minutes. I don't care. I don't care if the trade union laws tell you you're not allowed to do that. Tell them that people want to change now. Things are different now. We're moving on. And I don't believe that any employer or court in the land, and certainly the Tories, will try and go for anyone over the sorts of questions, because they will lose if they attempt to do that. So we have to build the party, the sense of resistance outside Parliament. And we should all work together with that. I mean, it was brilliant the way that Momentum, the organisation inside the Labour Party, mobilised activists during the election. It was a great thing, you know. It was a great thing. And in some places, not in every place by any manner of means, in some places, the canvassing became a sort of mass event of people. It wasn't just canvassing, it was more than that. It was almost like a demonstration. We should think about how we can continue the absolutely tremendous unity we felt, all of us. The Socialist Workers' Party supported Corbyn. We were on the streets supporting Corbyn. Our stalls were supporting Corbyn. We were arguing for Corbyn for every level. We need to find a way to continue working together after the election, whether it's against the pay cap, against the cuts, in support of strikes and so on. I think that's possible to do, and we must find a way to do it. And finally, as I said, I think socialism is being talked about much more widely than at any other time, in Britain and in other parts of the world as well. It's extraordinary, isn't it? that in America, Bernie Sanders got 13 million votes standing as a socialist. Now, he's not our sort of socialist, and you can argue about all of that. For me, that's not the crucial fact. The crucial fact, he said, I'm a democratic socialist, and he got 13 million votes inside the bloody Democratic primary. That's an extraordinary achievement. And socialism became one of the most Googled words in America as a result of Sanders doing it. There are millions of people across the world who know there's something wrong with a situation where 8 super billionaires have as much wealth as the lowest half of the world's population. 8 super billionaires, 4.5 billion people, have the same bloody wealth. There's something wrong with that sort of world. There's something wrong with a world which is so obsessed with profit, so out of control, that it is careering towards ecological catastrophe, and no one will do anything about it because it might interfere with the profit rates of individual companies and of the companies that the governments represent. There's something wrong with the world where ordinary people are so removed from control of things that things like the Grenfell Tower can happen. And if we want to change that, we need to change things at every level of society. We need a revolution, and that means going beyond Parliament, and that means having an organisation, a political party, which is built not on what happens simply about voting, but is built upon the resistance of ordinary people at the base of society. That's what we're going to continue to build, an independent revolutionary organisation which supports Corbyn against the right, which fights in every campaign that's taking place, but also fights for a socialist future. Thank you.
Right, I'm going to start off with 2 questions. The first question is from Paul Summers. He says, Labour is the biggest left-wing party. Under what circumstances would the SWP join Labour? And then the second question, with no name, is each of 3 Brighton Labour Party branches has 40 to 50 at each meeting. Brighton SWP has between 5 and 6. Why should I join SWP, not the Labour Party? Right, and our first speaker will be Pat Jones, followed by Jess Edwards. If you don't mind coming up to the front and using the mic. Thank you. It's just here. Thank you, Charlie.
Right. The dramatic shift to the left has been particularly seen in the health campaigns up and down the country. And it's really important that when we're relating to these health campaigns and others, that we understand how we're relating to them, because it's absolutely important. We are part of that campaign. We don't simply turn up to demos and so on, because we need to shape them. And I think Huddersfield, with our threatened A&E, has been no different to lots of other places. I mean, what happened there was a local guy, when they announced the closure, set up a Facebook page. It was shared and shared and shared, 44,000. The local Tory rag promoted this, promoted him, and he was a Tory businessman. He pulled along the Tory MP, Jason McCartney, and then they systematically tried to exclude any debate, discussion about where the cuts were coming from, about STPs, about trade unions. People were hounded off the Facebook page for trying to raise discussion and so on. There was a steering committee that did have people from the left on it, sadly not SWP. And one reaction was to go along with the Popular Front and go along with accepting the Tory MP and accepting that there couldn't be any criticism of him to keep the unity. And the other was to abstain and drop off the steering committee. And neither are an option for us. We have to act as revolutionaries. We have to use the United Front approach, where we work alongside anybody who wants to fight in that particular campaign, but we have to retain the integrity of our politics. We had a local group up at Colne Valley. From day one, we went along and said, look, we have a right to discuss this. We have a right to discuss where these cuts are coming from. We had Tories, but we treated them with respect. They were in our group. And never once did we, people did react to the abuse on Facebook. And we had to carry on smiling absolutely. But we had that debate in our group. We also had to show that we were willing to do a lot of the legwork. And we've now got Tory voters, former Tory voters, who were whooping and cheering at the Corbyn rally, who are absolutely loving all the marches. You know, the scales are falling off people's eyes big time. The marches are so important as well. People have never been on a march before. And the confidence and the strength in that unity that they gain from those marches has been amazing, to the point of, I mean, we pulled other people to our group, and now there's been other groups set up who are allowing that debate and looking at where the cuts are coming from. And there was an insistence that the March the 4th march had hands off HRI right at the very front of it, which was absolutely fantastic. There's no stopping them. I can't keep up with them now.
Can you please sum up? Sorry.
Yeah, when we had the Leeds march, they insisted on marching from the station to the town hall. Absolutely fantastic. Now, you know, as I say, we could have opted out, but we didn't. It's not always easy. It can be quite difficult, but we've got to keep smiling, keep to our revolutionary politics. And I mean, just a final point, the result was that in the Colne Valley, because we'd exposed that Tory MP, that there was a lot of move not to criticise him because he was supporting the campaign, so-called, he got kicked out. We got elected Thelma Walker, a local woman who's been supporting our campaigns. So we've now got, you know, a Labour MP in Parliament representing us who knows that she came from that campaign. She knows she's got that place because we were pushing that campaign. And she's, I mean, we've got a meeting to defend us.
Please sum up. Thank you.
But she's actually speaking on platforms now, which is amazing. So, yeah, I mean, we've just everything to gain. So
Please
just stick to your politics and keep fighting.
Right. Jess will be followed by Sean Vernell.
I want to say that I think the United Front tactic is absolutely key for us as revolutionaries in terms of how we operate at the moment, but that is quite a tricky thing to get right. It's a bit of an art that we need organisation for. So, you know, when Charlie talked about the councils, for example, and, you know, tragically, so many Labour councils that are putting through the Tory cuts. It's difficult, isn't it? Because we have to be, on the one hand, making arguments and uniting with people in the Labour Party and not just focusing on the fact that it's the Labour councils doing the cuts, because that would make it much more difficult for us to unite with the people who we think that we have to work with. But at the same time, we also can't be dropping the argument with those people that actually they should be fighting with us against putting through the cuts, and they should be, you know, doing things like setting deficit budgets and all of the rest of it. We have to do both at the same time, and I think that's quite a tricky thing to do, that we have to talk about in events like this and discuss how we manage to do it. And it's the same, I think, as our relationship with the trade unions and the trade union leaders. And just an example from my own union, the NUT, has been very supportive of the school cuts campaign, and has facilitated lots of parents groups that have been springing up around the country, that has, you know, been publicising them and encouraging members to get involved, and encouraging NUT members to get parents to set up their own campaigns, and all of the rest of it. We have to unite with that. It's something that put, I think it was 5,000 people that marched in Bristol recently against school cuts. This is something that we have to absolutely celebrate and be part of. But at the same time, it's also we can't leave it just at the level of a parents' campaign. If we're teachers, we have to be having an industrial strategy and organising for an industrial strategy inside our union to beat the cuts in schools as well. We talk about the pay cap. The pay cap won't be beaten by simply demonstrations. There will have to be an industrial strategy that will involve strikes. And of course, we know that that's going to be difficult because there's new thresholds and all of those kinds of things that will be used as all reasons why perhaps, you know, it's not possible and we can't do it. But nevertheless, we have to be the people that are arguing for both that campaign on the streets, the campaigning in the communities, coupled with an industrial strategy as well. And I think, you know, when people talk about waiting for Labour, that argument is harder now, I think, than it's been for a long time, because you have a real prospect of a decent Labour government coming into power. Nevertheless, it's not an argument that we conduct as revolutionaries. We'll have to carry on debating it. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a course that we have to weave all the way. That means that we can unite with Labour, unite with the trade union leaders, but also not drop what we know brings about the real change in society, the change of worker struggle from below. So, yeah, that's it.
Right, following Sean Vernell will be Carol.
Sean Vernell, Joint National Secretary of the Unite the Resistance and UCU National Executive Member. I just want to talk something about pay, because I think Charlie's absolutely right. The question of pay now, and I think we have to make a significant shift to ensuring that the pay issue is one we mobilise and organise around. And you have to pinch yourself, really, don't you? The idea that the Tory government, any Tory government, will be split over pay is amazing. You see the Tory grandees running around radio station TVs trying to shore up Hammond and Theresa May against the likes of Gove and others trying to say we must give. All of a sudden we find that people like Boris Johnson care about public sector pay workers. You can get a sense there, the fact that they're divided by the question of pay really does come from the whole groundswell of anger focused around that issue. For them, it's riches, for us, peanuts, and it has to stop, and it has to stop now. That is the message that is coming across. You see, yesterday at my national executive, we voted to implement a motion that was unanimously passed at our Congress to ballot our members over pay. We will be taking industrial action if we win that ballot in the autumn. So far, it's the first unions I know of which has moved into that orbit. Now, it's not enough. We had 24,000 members, that's all, is in further education. But it was a bit like the pensions campaign. We started with that layer of people and we moved to push others. Because we understand why, because it's quite ridiculous, quite frankly. The trade union has been so quiet over the question of pay. It's mad when you think about this. And we have to say to friends like Kevin, it's brilliant that you've got 500,000 members in your union now. It's fantastic there. But what's the point of having 500,000 members if you do fuck all with them? It's absolutely crazy. And I know what their concern is. And I tell you what their concern is. The concern is we won't get the threshold, the 50% threshold. They panic about that. Well, again, we have to connect it to what's going on here. Can you imagine it? If the General Secretary, when a ballot is taking place, that the General Secretary, alongside Jeremy Corbyn, alongside John McDonnell, did rallies in every single town and city, I think we'll get the threshold, by the way, easily. I don't care if you're 500,000 members or 24,000 members. Clearly, if you stand still and do nothing, you're not. You know what Corbyn did? When you went round the election and you look whether he did the rallies, the votes went up significantly. Significantly. We have to apply that measure. Now, is Jeremy going to say, piss off to the trade unionists, I'm coming down to do a meeting anyway? No, he's not going to do that. Wrongly? Possibly. But he's not. What we have to do is go into our branches now, tomorrow, emergency, get meetings off the ground, pass motions, calling upon your leadership to call a national action over the pay and invite Jeremy Corbyn to come and do meetings for us. So we get an invite personally from our own unions to him. I don't think Jeremy will say no if he got a personal invite from our unions. So I do think everything is up to play for, but we have to approach it differently and organise in a way which certainly connects. In a workplace, it's not much fun. Actually, life's pretty shit most of the time. The bullying managers are just as bad as they were yesterday. The pay is getting worse, and so on and so forth. But of course, that's the one experience. But when people look outside the canteen, outside their workplace, and look at the world, it looks a very, very exciting place. Our job is how to connect the economic struggles, the everyday life and conditions of work, to the more exciting political life outside. We don't just think about it, we have to think about how we organise that. And it starts with a question of pay and put it up at that central.
Carol will be followed by Jane Aitchison.
I was in the Labour Party and I left during the miners' strike when Neil Kinnock was condemning the violence of the miners and not the violence of the police. I rejoined the Labour Party recently on the Corbyn surge, first as a £3 member and now as a full member. I live in Bromley. Bromley is now not dominated by the Blairites. There's been a good surge of people in and things have changed. During the election, I canvassed in Croydon, tactically, because it was a marginal seat, in order to kick Gavin Barwell up the arse. And it was successful. On election day, people were turning up in droves, young and old, white and black. It really was a sight to see, and it was successful. Times are changing. Really, the political atmosphere is so different. My question is, under what circumstances would the SWP join the Labour Party, now the biggest left-wing party, period?
Jane will be followed by Marianne Owens.
Jane Aitchison, I'm also the Joint National Secretary of Unite the Resistance with Sean, and I just wanted to follow on from what Sean said. I think that Unite the Resistance, as people will know in this room probably, was formed in order to build on the fantastic strike action that we took in 2011, which is a long time ago now, but we could go back to that and build on that very successfully now. Around the issue of pay, not just in the public sector and on the public sector pay cap question, but also drawing in private sector comrades who are also very low paid and suffering particularly around the issues like the gig economy and Deliveroo and so on, and the questions around the kind of contracts that people are on too. So I think we need a Unite the Resistance conference to put further pressure on the trade unions and indeed the TUC, some of whom are very reluctant and are now even not waiting for Labour, but even waiting to see what the Tories are going to do next. So that's the pressure that we need to put on, and we need to build for that conference. Thank you, comrades.
Marianne will be followed by Eileen Short.
Thank you. It's Marianne Owens, SWP member from Cardiff and also on the PCS Union National Executive Committee. I'm really pleased to hear that UCU have done what they've done yesterday, because that's going to be really helpful for me when I go to my NEC meeting in a week and a half's time, because I can say that's what UCU are doing. We can see what the FPU are doing. Now, there's a number of things within PCS. What Jane, who works in the DWP, didn't just mention is that last week there was an announcement that 1 in 10 job centres are going to be closed. We're already closing all but 13 tax offices. This is going to decimate the public services, but actually, particularly for what's happening in the job centres, closing 1 in 10 means that benefit claimants won't be able to get there. People who are disabled, people that don't have any money, won't be able to go and get their benefits and sign on. If they're 5 minutes late, they'll be sanctioned, they'll lose their benefits, and this is something that's got to be stopped, and I think we need to unite around that. It's not about our jobs, that's about the public sector. Now, I think in terms of pay, I think one of the things I'm going to say is obviously from a PCS perspective, I think we need to go out there and fight and join UCU and the FBU. But if you're in any other public sector area, you need to be going to your branch, you need to be getting your union branch to write to your NEC, to your regional committees, you need to be putting on that pressure. It is much easier for someone like me to stand in an NEC when 35 branches have written to the General Secretary and said we want to go on strike and we want a campaign. So I think the job for us is to get out there, wherever you work, wherever your union is, let's put the pressure on, let's have this fight, let's make this bigger than those strikes in 2011. The picture has changed, as Charlie has said. If we can get those millions of people out on strike like we did in 2011, we can bring these bastards down. Thank you.
Eileen will be followed by Michael Bradley.
So I'm part of the Defend Council Housing campaign and the wider Axe the Housing Act. We have fought for 18 months and stalled serious bits of Tory laws, but as Charlie was saying, we haven't stopped them burning us in our homes. And it is right that Grenfell changes everything because it exposes, it's a bit like a bomb dropped during the Blitz and cut people's homes in half, and the world can see what life was like in North Kensington, but the world can see what the gulf is between nasty, vicious, weak Tories, nationally and locally, and what working class people will do to support each other and to organise. But the question for us is, how does Grenfell change everything? Yes, because already it has to be not like New Orleans. It has to be not like, let's demolish all the tower blocks, let's send these black people, oh, I didn't say black honestly, but let's send them all away out of London. That's the one agenda. Our agenda has to be that we organise in our own hands, just like we organise food and trainers for kids who've got nothing left. Tower block safety and security in places where people work. This same bloody cladding is on hospitals and there's no sprinklers in the new schools. I mean, seriously, this is a job for all of us. But we aren't going to do it piecemeal, bit by bit. So there's a big meeting in London on Wednesday we've been giving out leaflets for, but there needs to be meetings like that everywhere. And this is not just about waiting till some landlord diagnoses a block, but it's also about a bigger thing. And the final thing I want to say is about this question of councils. Now, we as Defend Council Housing, we've worked with loads of people in and outside the Labour Party and Greens and others to say we need to change the whole approach. We need to publicly owned housing that we invest in and own and is a right, not a profit-driven privilege. But if you're the leader of Cambridge Council or if you're the newly elected whatever, how are you going to resist 2 years maybe of attrition on your budget and whatever kind of problems are going to come your way? How are you going to resist that? Now, I would say there's only two choices. You are either trying to play the market, develop 100 new homes, 60% of which you're selling off at, playing that game, or you're standing beside a newly enraged and organised grassroots tenants and trade union movement that is saying, no, we will rip your throat out if you don't take this cladding down and put sprinklers in our blocks.
Please sum up.
That kind of movement is the only way that Labour councils will be able to head off a real vibrant opposition to change the world. So it's about building the kind of movement that can stop the Tories, and in that we have a common project, but
Please
only
sum up.
if we organise from below.
Yeah, I wanted to come back on the why join the 6 people in Brighton and not the 150 people at the 3 other meetings question, really. I mean, first of all, to be fair to the Brighton comrades, they do quite often get more than 6 people, but that's not really the point of the contribution. I think that the point is that at the minute, we are not going to see a return to normal politics. Right, so we're not going to go back into some box that happened before the economic crisis developed, right, and where it all flows smoothly along parliamentary lines, right? Even if the commentators and the political pundits and the political parties themselves would like it all to go back into the box, it's not. One of the things that Charlie talked about is how Grenfell turned politics onto the streets, somebody said. That's the process every day at the minute, right? So if something incredible happens, when anybody else, we were all just running around 5 minutes ago because if you read the Guardian article, it looked like Trump was coming on Saturday. It just shows you should always read the Guardian very carefully when they put something up. The real point is there is a massive sea change going on in British politics. There are 800,000 people or so in the Labour Party. There are thousands upon thousands of people going out there who are enthusiastic, who campaign for Labour and the rest of it. And we were 100% alongside those people, day by day, week by week, encouraging the struggle, arguing at work and college and in our communities why you had to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. That's where we were, right, stuff over it. But the process isn't going to stop there. That's why when we talk about the need to talk where we're going with this movement, because if Jeremy is elected, it is not that history simply repeats itself. Oh, he's just waiting in the wings to sell out, really, and the rest of it. No, a Labour government, we know, a Labour Party has over the last 2 years under Jeremy Corbyn been under enormous pressure, both from the right inside the Labour Party, from the trade union leaders at different stages, from the press, can you imagine what would happen if a Labour government was elected that said tomorrow, £10 an hour minimum wage, rip up the anti-trade union laws, go through the thing. Do we seriously think at that point that the British ruling class, a ruling class dripping in blood for hundreds of years, would be any less vicious than the ruling class inside Greece? Do we think that the EU or the IMF or the World Bank or any other organisation would give the Labour government under Jeremy Corbyn more of a break than they gave Syriza or anybody else? No. And under that basis, while working day to day alongside Labour Party comrades, we have to have a discussion here. In the end, if we want to break the rule of capital, if we want to end racism and the rest of it, it means challenging the system fundamentally. And if we challenge the system fundamentally, they will come at us. They will come for us. You don't just have to read through the history books, but it also helps. Our movement goes through whole cycles of brilliant left-wing governments who try to fight and try to change things. Salvador Allende is the idol of Jeremy Corbyn. He was a very brave man. He died with a tin hat on his head and an Armalite in his hand, defending the presidential palace in Chile and stuff. But actually what happened there was a reformist government was overthrown in a country that saw itself as democratic, cultured, and all the rest of it. We have to put an argument about the need for revolutionary organisation, not to separate ourselves off, but because we do want to achieve socialism. We do want to get to a stage when the election of a Labour government is the first step in that process. And if we work with people, we've got the right to argue how it ends up. That's why we do need revolutionary organisation as well.
I'm really sorry, I forgot to call the next speaker. So if Malcolm Kennedy can just show me where he is. Oh, brilliant, not upstairs. And then following Malcolm will be Alan Kenny, the last two speakers. Because of lack of time, I'm going to hold them to 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Malcolm from North London. Once upon a time in the 1960s, somebody by the name of Lyndon Baines Johnson described the process of people on the outside of a tent pissing in and people on the inside tent pissing out. And this might represent a kind of thing between the SWP and the Labour Party in that thing. But I think that at the present time, because there are so many Blairite councils and so forth in the country at large, it might be useful at this juncture to have the SWP fighting resistance. For example, in my part of the world, in Haringey, where we're fighting the social cleansing of the Haringey Development Vehicle, resistance needs to come from sources without the Labour Party, although people in the Labour Party are trying to resist it at the time. But once we've got rid of the Blairites, that might be possible. One thing about this government, this election, is that we've had 38 years of bullshit government, and that's why Jeremy did so well. And that's the thing. And finally, I would like to say that Hillary Clinton's biggest problem against Trump was that she wasn't Bernie Sanders.
I wanted to come back to the question of the trade unions, because I think we have to say that the unions cannot be a sideshow in what's going on at the moment. And I think there's too much of a feeling that that's the case. At Unison Conference, Dave Prentice claimed responsibility for Corbyn's election. Now, why is there laughter in the room? I wouldn't have a problem with Prentice claiming responsibility for Corbyn's election if people felt that Prentice had gone out there and got Corbyn elected. Why is there laughter in the room? And there's a general feeling, I think it's the same for McCluskey. If anyone read McCluskey's interview in the Morning Star, McCluskey's dealing with yesterday's arguments. What we want at the moment is a lead. We want McCluskey saying, yeah, it's good he says let's have demonstrations. We want him to say everyone to bloody Manchester, don't we? Shaping it, giving a lead. I think our trade union leaders should have been down to Grenfell doing an investigation into what's gone on there. that kind of thing. And it doesn't take much imagination. If you were Francis O'Grady at the moment, you know, the reason I think Glastonbury is important, by the way, is that 4 million people watched the speech of Corbyn speaking at Glastonbury. Is that if you were Francis O'Grady, sit down with Stormzy, sit down with Kate Tempest, say we want to launch a national campaign for £10 an hour, we want to reverse the decline in union membership and we want to get young people involved. We want to have demonstrations in every city around the country over this question, finishing in a carnival for decent pay. It doesn't take much imagination. Corbyn has shown the way of how to do it. I thought the Birmingham rally was really interesting, by the way, in Corbyn's campaign. When he got Sophia Khan to come and speak with him. You know, I think it sent a really interesting signal to people about activity and so on. The last point is what this is about is stuff has to start going back up the chain, doesn't it? It's exactly what Sean said. People have to start the motion. The motion's going back up the chain to the unions. There has to be a sense of dragging the unions, kicking and screaming to take a lead in this situation. Because as Michael said in his contribution, there are important battles at the moment. The battles to come, you know, could be extremely urgent, extremely important in a situation of real peril for the working class.
Charlie will now come back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who spoke. I agree with pretty much everything that was said around the question of pay. I'm not going to continue on that because I want to talk about the key question, which was the Brighton question, if we can call it that. One of my formative experiences was spending a year in South Africa. I went to the branch meeting of the Comrades in an area of Johannesburg soon after I arrived. I said, how many of us are there? 4, they said. I said, in this branch? Yeah, that's true. How many have we got in Johannesburg? The same, 4. How many have we got in the country? 4. There's a ANC, African National Congress rally taking place in Soweto later this week. How many will they get there? 60,000. You have to think why you're in the one, not the other. And the reason is because when the crunch comes, is it best to be organising outside those sorts of formations or inside those sorts of formations? The experience of the African National Congress, which of course is an alliance with the South African Communist Party and the biggest trade union federation in South Africa, an immensely powerful working class organisation. Its leader was Nelson Mandela at the time, who, you know, whatever you think about Jeremy Corbyn, Nelson Mandela was quite an impressive figure. The experience has been an appalling record of the implementation of neoliberalism, the spread of homelessness, and of course it was a great victory to get rid of apartheid, but nonetheless what's come afterwards has been the continuing racism and poverty of the black majority in South Africa. That's not about individuals. It's not about individuals, it's about structures. It is that capitalism doesn't work through the democracy of parliament, it works through the power of the bosses and of the state and of its unaccountable institutions, and you can only crack them not through parliament, but through mobilisation outside parliament in the streets and the workplaces. You see, as Comrade spoke about Clinton's biggest mistake, Bernie Sanders' greatest mistake was to stick with Hillary Clinton. It made him completely ineffective. He is now arguing inside a party which is a thoroughly pro-bourgeois party, and the key question in America is whether the burgeoning sense of change in America ends up being channeled once more into the dead end of the Democratic Party, or whether it breaks from it to form a new socialist organisation in America. Now, the Labour Party isn't the Democratic Party, right? But, for example, it wouldn't let the SWP. It's not really a question. You know, if the SWP was allowed to join, selling its paper, holding its meetings, waving its flags and so on, it would be a real question. It's not really a question. Maybe I could join as an individual. I doubt it, actually. But, you know, even if I could, the SWP ain't going to be allowed to join. And think about what happened in Greece. Were the most effective people in Greece those who stayed inside Syriza, Or were they people outside Syriza who said, we're going to organise in the workplaces, we're going to organise against racism, we're going to organise against Golden Dawn, we're going to try and get the strikes getting back together again? They were the people who actually have been a more effective resistance than the people who stayed inside Syriza and have been wholly ineffective in terms of preventing the drift rightwards. Now, I understand there are good comrades here who I know well, friends of mine, who are in the Labour Party, but when the crunch comes, my belief is the place you have to be is organising the resistance outside rather than being constrained by the structures and the politics of the Labour Party inside the organisation. And our argument is not about avoiding struggle. If you want to immerse yourself in struggle, join the Socialist Workers' Party. If you want to work alongside people in the Labour Party and good people outside the Labour Party, join the Socialist Workers' Party. If you want to be part of the resistance at every level, over housing, over pay, over austerity, over racism, over environmental catastrophe, if you want to be part of all of those different struggles, then join the Socialist Workers' Party. And when the key moment comes, and Corbyn has been elected by all of us working together about it, and they turn round to us and say, we don't give a damn for democracy, we're going to crush you if you try and change society fundamentally. You have to be in the streets, in the workplaces, building the organisation of ordinary people, and you can't do it then. You have to start now to build the sorts of movements that are required, argue for the politics of it and argue for the organisation of it. And that's why I hope those of you who aren't in the Socialist Workers' Party will join us.